Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to start a new series. This will be part 1. Today's lesson is called Buried Truth, the Hidden Histories of Black Chosen People. Today we're going to look into the true history of God's chosen people. We're going to explore the facts and the evidence concerning the true identity of God's chosen people, the true identity of those that truly belong in the Middle East, the true identity of those who have the right to claim the blessings of Abraham, those who have a right to claim that they are children of God's covenant, those who have the right to be the light to the Gentile, reflecting the truths of Yeshua HaMashiach, the name of the true Messiah, the name that is above all names. Let's open up in a word of prayer. Dear Yeshua, we ask that you open up our ears and our minds, and that you unshackle our minds and take the blindfolds off of our eyes, that we might be able to see the time that we're living in, that we might be able to understand that this is the time of restoration. This is the time when our eyes are being opened and lies and deceptions are being revealed. This is the time of the awakening, where buried truths are uncovered, truths that have been buried under layers of whiteness and layers of whitewash truths and buried identities. We ask this in Yeshua's holy name. Amen and amen. Let's jump in. We have a lot to cover. We live in a time of great deception, where historical lies have been told so often and for so long that they have been taken for historical truth. Who are the true Israelites? Who are the true children of the covenant? What people were God talking to when he spoke from Mount Sinai? Was it the ancestors of the Europeans that heard the voice of God speaking from Mount Sinai? Was it European people that were in bondage in Egypt for hundreds of years? Are the people inhabiting the land of Israel today the true covenant people? Or is this just a great deception, a flipping of historical truth, a rewriting of history? The great awakening is happening. Buried truths are being unearthed. Herod once asked, "What is truth?" That's a good question. Truth is based on substance and evidence. Hebrews 11:1-3 talks about this. It says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. By faith we understand that the worlds were formed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible." We know that God created the universe because we can experience the universe. We can see the evidence that they exist. We can touch the substances that God have created. Therefore, we have to conclude that there is a God. By the same token, who are the true children of God? Is it the Europeans that now occupy the Holy Lands, that occupy Jerusalem? What does the Bible have to say about that? What is the substance that points to this being a true fact? What is the evidence? What does it really show? Where we're going to look at these things. Our truth have to be based on those two things, the evidence and the substance. We're going to look at both.
We're cracking open a vault of history that has been locked away for generations. We're talking about DNA evidence, archaeological discoveries, and testimonies that will shake the very foundations of what you believe about the chosen people. Buckle up, because this journey through time is about to challenge everything. Picture this. You're watching the evening news, and the camera pans across Jerusalem. You see government officials, military leaders, business executives. Now close your eyes and imagine Moses coming down from Mount Sinai. Imagine King David dancing before the ark. Imagine the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon's court. Do those faces match? Do those complexions align? Something doesn't add up, and it's time we talked about it. The modern state of Israel presents us with a paradox that archaeologists, geneticists, and theologians have been wrestling with for decades. How did a land that sits at the crossroads of Africa and Asia, a region that has been inhabited by dark-skinned peoples for millennia, suddenly become dominated by people who look like they stepped off a European street corner? This isn't about politics. This isn't about picking sides. This is about truth, and truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it. Tonight, we're going to walk through evidence that will make you question not just modern Israel, but the very nature of identity, heritage, and what it means to be chosen. We'll explore DNA studies that trace bloodlines back thousands of years. We'll examine ancient texts that paint a very different picture of what the Israelites actually looked like. We'll hear testimonies from communities that have been marginalized, silenced, and forgotten. And we'll ask the hard question that nobody wants to address. Who has the right to claim the inheritance of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Here's what's going to blow your mind. The archaeological record tells a story that Hollywood never wanted you to see. When we dig into the ancient layers of Jerusalem, Jericho, and other biblical sites, we find artifacts, pottery, and human remains that paint a picture of a people who look nothing like modern Ashkenazi Jews. The DNA evidence is mounting, and it's pointing towards something that will make you
They told me to kneel, I bowed my head, prayed for peace while I bled. Gave them all my Sundays, my trust, my tithes. But the voice in my soul wasn't never mine. We were brainwashed. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed. We were just children. Playing someone else's game. Gave God the praise. Gave the devil blame. But it was us all along. It was us all along. Everybody plays a fool and that's alright. That's alright. It's the rising after that gives us light. Don't beat yourself down for believing the lie. You were searching for love, that's nothing to hide. We were brainwashed. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed. Just children playing someone else's game. Gave God the praise. Gave him the blame. But it was us all along. It was us all along. We were brainwashed. We were brainwashed. But we found ourselves now brainwashed, brainwashed no more. We're waking up. We're waking up. We're waking up.
Why is it that you can question anything except one thing? If you question who the Jews really are, your right to free speech is taken away. Your content will be taken down. Why is this? If one can defend their identity, why do you have to go to such measures to keep people from questioning that identity, from putting it to the test, looking at the evidence or the substance? If it's the truth, then you should not be afraid to show the evidence and the proof that these things are true. People's careers have been taken away. Their livelihoods have been taken away. People have been murdered for questioning these people's true heritage and true identity that occupy Jerusalem and Israel at this present hour.
The DNA evidence is mounting, and it's pointing towards something that will make you rethink everything you learned in Sunday school. Let's start with Abraham himself. Genesis tells us that Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldeans. Modern archaeology places Ur in what we now call Iraq, right at the heart of the ancient Mesopotamian world. This wasn't Europe, folks. This was a region inhabited by dark-skinned Semitic peoples who were culturally and genetically connected to both Africa and Asia. When God called Abraham to leave his father's house, he wasn't calling a European. He was calling a man whose features would have been far more similar to modern-day Arabs, Ethiopians, and North Africans. The Hebrew language itself gives us clues. When the ancient texts describe people as beautiful or noteworthy, they often use terms that suggest darker complexions were the norm. The word Admoni, used to describe both Esau and King David, has been translated as ruddy or red, but ancient Hebrew scholars suggest this referred to a reddish-brown complexion common among African and Middle Eastern peoples, not the pale redness we might imagine today. Joseph's story in Egypt becomes even more fascinating when you consider the racial dynamics. Genesis tells us that Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt and eventually rose to become Pharaoh's right-hand man. Think about this logically. If Joseph had looked dramatically different from the Egyptians, would he have been able to blend in so seamlessly? When his own brothers came to buy grain during the famine, they didn't even recognize him. This suggests that Joseph's appearance was consistent with the Egyptian population of his time. The Egyptians of the ancient world were predominantly African peoples. The Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, the magnificent temples along the Nile, all of these were built by civilizations that modern archaeology confirms were primarily composed of African peoples. If Joseph could move undetected among them, if he could marry into Pharaoh's court, if he could govern effectively, it tells us something profound about his appearance and cultural background. Moses presents us with perhaps the most compelling case. He was raised in Pharaoh's house, educated as an Egyptian prince, and later fled to Midian, where he married Zipporah, described as a Cushite woman. Cush, in biblical geography, refers to the region we now call Ethiopia and Sudan. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness with dark-skinned desert peoples before returning to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. When we read Exodus carefully, we see a man who could pass for Egyptian royalty and who was comfortable among African desert tribes. The Ethiopian connection runs deeper than most people realize. The Beta Israel community of Ethiopia has maintained Jewish traditions for over 2,000 years. Their practices, their understanding of Torah, their observance of holidays like Passover and Yom Kippur, all of these developed in isolation from European Jewish communities. Yet when researchers studied their traditions, they found remarkable consistency with ancient Jewish practices that had been lost or modified in other communities. Archaeological evidence from ancient Israel consistently shows artifacts and artistic depictions that favor darker skin tones. Ancient coins, pottery decorations, and carved reliefs from the region show people with features that align more closely with African and Middle Eastern populations than with European ones. The ancient world didn't have the racial categories we use today, but the visual evidence is clear. The people who inhabited the Holy Land looked like the indigenous peoples of the Middle East and North Africa.
Are these people afraid to be questioned or afraid to submit to DNA tests because their claims to the land, their claims of being Semitic is false? If it's true, they should have no fear of being questioned. They will not submit to DNA tests. In fact, they've made DNA tests in Israel illegal. Why is that? I tell you why. It's because it will show that they are European. It will show that they're not Semitic at all. And so it would be a contradiction if you question who they are and their identity. They want to call you anti-Semitic. But how can that be? They're not a Semitic people at all. They are impersonators. Yeshua has a lot to say about these people. He prophetically identified who these people would be.
Modern Israel presents us with a striking demographic reality. Walk through Tel Aviv, stroll through the Knesset, observe the leadership of major institutions, and you'll notice something that should make us pause. Approximately 75% of Israel's Jewish population traces their immediate ancestry to Europe, not the Middle East. This isn't a secret, it's documented demographic reality. But what does it mean for our understanding of biblical heritage and modern identity? The irony is almost too obvious to ignore. Israel sits at the crossroads of Africa and Asia, surrounded by Arab populations who have lived in the region for generations, yet the dominant population appears more European than Middle Eastern. Drive from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and you'll pass through landscapes that have been inhabited by dark-skinned peoples for millennia. Yet the faces in government, military leadership, and major media are overwhelmingly those of people whose grandparents spoke Yiddish in Polish villages. This transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't accidental. The Zionist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries was primarily organized and funded by European Jewish communities who had both the resources and political connections necessary to establish a new nation. These were brilliant, determined people who had survived centuries of persecution and were committed to creating a Jewish homeland. But their vision of what that homeland should look like was inevitably shaped by their own cultural background. Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, envisioned Israel as a European-style democracy planted in the Middle East. When you read his writings, you see references to bringing European civilization and values to the region. The early Zionist settlements were designed to look and function like European communities. The architecture, the agricultural methods, the social structures, all of these were imported from Europe rather than adapted from local traditions. The Holocaust accelerated this demographic shift dramatically. Hundreds of thousands of European Jews who survived the Nazi genocide found refuge in the newly established Israel. These were people who had lost everything, who needed immediate safety and community. Their arrival shaped Israel's culture, politics, and religious practices in profound ways. But it also meant that Israel's founding population was overwhelmingly European in appearance and cultural orientation.
These people claiming to be Jews are so European they had to change their names to sound more Middle Eastern. Their original language is not Hebrew. They had to learn Hebrew. They are Ashkenazi, but they are not Jews. They are converts to the Jewish faith.
Modern Israeli leadership reflects this European dominance clearly. From David Ben-Gurion to Golda Meir to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime ministers have predominantly been Ashkenazi Jews whose families came from Europe. The same pattern holds true in the military, the judiciary, major media outlets, and large corporations. This isn't necessarily intentional discrimination, but it reflects the reality of who held power during Israel's formative years and how that power has been transmitted across generations. The cultural impact of this European dominance extends beyond politics into daily life. Modern Hebrew incorporates numerous words from Yiddish and European languages rather than maintaining purely Semitic roots. Israeli cuisine, while it has incorporated Middle Eastern elements, was initially shaped by European Jewish cooking traditions. Even religious practices were influenced by customs that developed during centuries in European exile.
The danger in this great deception is that if the Jews are white European, that eugenifies the whitewashing of the Messiah they call Jesus. It's one big collective lie. One leg supports the other leg. The entire world was colonized by their false religion of Christianity based on the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race over all the other races. This is the bedrock of that white supremacy and white superiority. It is embedded in false Judaism.
When European Jewish communities declared their intention to return to Zion, were they returning to a place their ancestors had left? Or were they immigrating to a place that had been described to them in religious texts? The psychological impact of this realization can be overwhelming. Imagine discovering that everything you were taught about your identity, your heritage, your rightful place in the world, might be more complicated than you realized.
These are the descendants of Esau. Romans 9:13 says, "As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated." 2 Estes 6 verse 9 says, "For Esau is the end of the world." That's the descendants of Esau, is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that follows. The world is fighting hard to keep this event from happening, that the descendants of Esau and their domination after the 400 years have expired of God's chosen people's punishment. Once it ends, we will begin to see the systematic destruction of the Anglo power systems around the world, the descendants of Esau. This is what we are experiencing at this very moment, a complete meltdown of the system that the descendants of Esau have built that has dominated the world. The Bible calls it Babylon the Great. At the same time, we should also see the great awakening happening among God's people, where they begin to realize who they really are, when they begin to realize their true identity and their true history.
They're very much so making a distinction between the Jews and the whites. And you'll often hear folks who consider themselves whites will say, no, Jews are not like us. There's something different. What's your perspective on that?
Jews are white people. Jewish people are white. They come from a man named Amalek, which was the great grandson of Esau. They come from his lineage. And when it was mentioned about white people being the devil, and from what they speak and say, and then what we know biblically, when you read in the same book, Revelation 2:9, listen what it says. "I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich," talking to the real Israelites. "And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan." So wait a minute. What is this saying? There's a people on the earth calling themselves Jews. And before we ever came on the scene, it was a certain people. Who was that? That's the Jewish man today. They calls himself the Jew. The Bible says, look into his history. You'll find out he's actually a Jewish convert. A man named, I'll give you a quick history, 2 seconds. A man named John Hyrcanus during the time of the Maccabean revolt. He was from the Hasmonean dynasty. That was our forefather. He forced the Edomites to convert to Judaism in order for them to keep their land. So that's where you get the Herodians. In the New Testament, you read about Herod. He wanted to kill Christ when he was born, things of that nature. That's where those people come from. They're Edomites. And their descendants today are the people that are claiming to be Jews.
You're very knowledgeable in this book. How long have you been studying under this particular organization?
10 years.
10 years.
10 years, yes, sir.
They're very much so making a distinction between the Jews and the whites. And you'll often hear folks who consider themselves whites will say, no, Jews are not like us. There's something different. What's your perspective on that?
Yeshua prophesied in Revelation chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. He talks about a group of people opposing his people. That same group of people say they are Jews, but Yeshua quickly says, but they are not. So in other words, some group of people in the last days would be posing as his people. They would usurp the identity of God's chosen people. He also says that they would worship in synagogue. Do you know that there's only one group of people today that worship in synagogues? And that is Ish. I won't call them by their name too many times because I'll get flagged and they'll take my video down. Look at the picture on the screen. Let me explain. Verse 9. I know about your suffering and your poverty, but you are rich. Who is he talking to? He is talking to the Israelites who happen to be black. They lived in northeast Africa. They later split that off and called it the Middle East. But in Yeshua's day, it was all one continent. It was inhabited not by Europeans. It was inhabited by people that are black, that look just like me. It was inhabited by my ancestors. And then he goes on to say, I know the blasphemy of those opposing you. And then he says, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. What were they about to suffer? Well, 70 AD was coming. They will later be taken in the slave trade, and they will be slaves in the Americas, and they will suffer there for 400 years. Yes, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. That's the 400-year punishment. But it was more than 400 years. It started in 70 AD, the part where they were taken to a place of bondage and suffering, the second Egypt. That was a 400-year period, the end of which would be marked by a great shift and a great awakening where the lies of the Gentiles would be exposed. And then he goes on to say, they say they are Jews. In this prophecy, he's saying there's going to be a group that say they're Jews, but they are not Jews, but they belong to the synagogue of Satan. In the book of John, he talks to this same group of people. He says, you are of your father the devil, and you want to do the same things that your father did. Those were the Herodians. They were the descendants of the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. Revelation chapter 3 verse 8 through 9 speaks of the same deception. Yeshua says, I know all the things you do. Here he's talking to his people. And I have opened a door for you that no one can close. You have little strength, yet you obeyed my word and did not deny me. Look, I will force those who belong to Satan's synagogue, those liars who say they are Jews but are not, to come and bow down at your feet. They will acknowledge that you are the ones I love. Look at the picture now. I'll read this again, and you see the peoples that he's talking to on the right-hand side. I know all the things you do, and I have opened a door for you that no one can close. They'll try to close it, but they cannot close it. They'll try to stop the awakening, but they won't be able to. Least they find themselves fighting even against God. You have little strength, yet you obeyed my words and did not deny me. That's who he's talking to. And then he's talking to the group right below them. Look, I will force those who belong to Satan's synagogue, these liars who say they are Jews but are not, to come and bow down at your feet. They will acknowledge that you are the ones I love. You know, God also says in Deuteronomy 28 that his people would forget who they are. They would not be gallivanting around the world while they're in their suffering, recognizing that they are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they are the Semitic peoples that are mentioned in the Bible as God's chosen people, the apple of his eye. On the other hand, these imposters that are occupying Jerusalem at this present moment, they know that they are not Semitic. They know that they are Gentiles, and they're trying to convince the world that they are who they say they are. That is opposite with respect to the prophecies in the Old Testament concerning God's people losing their heritage and not knowing about their history or identity. Luke 21, verse 23 and 24 gives us more information as to who the people who are currently occupying Israel and Jerusalem are, how terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in these days. For there will be disaster in the land and great anger against this people. Anger from who? From the Anglo nations. They hate God's people and they're angry with them. This is 70 AD, where they were attacked by the Romans. Those that escaped ran into Africa to hide amongst people who looked just like them, the children of Ham. Many of them ran to West Africa, where they were later taken to the Americas as slaves and scattered all around the world. Verse 24, they will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world. And Jerusalem, and listen at this part, Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles come to an end. Look at the chart right beneath there. This is a chart of what the Bible paints concerning the times of the Gentiles. He says the captivity would start with the enslavement of God's people in Babylon. Next, the Medes and the Persians would enslave them. Next, the Grecians would enslave them. Next, the Romans would enslave them. And then there would be a revived Roman Empire. This is the day that we're living in right now, where the times of the Gentiles will soon be coming to an end when Yeshua returns to earth to set up the millennial kingdom. This is when the times of the Gentiles will end. We're living in this parenthesis. It's an earthly parenthesis where the Gentiles have supremacy over God's holy people. This is called the times of the Gentiles. So Yeshua is telling us who is occupying Jerusalem and Israel at this very moment. He says they are not Semitic, they are Gentiles. And it will be that way until Yeshua returns to set up his kingdom. And then he will end the supremacy of the Gentiles once and for all. It is not something for God's people to do. We are to be a light unto the Gentiles. This is a 1747 map of West Africa. Notice the kingdom of Judah, the area circled in blue and highlighted in red. It says the kingdom of Judah. Remember what I've said before, that after 70 AD, that God's people fled to Africa to hide amongst the other African people. Those African people later sold the Jews that would not assimilate into their cultures but remain separate. They sold them to the Europeans. They weren't selling their own people. They were selling outsiders to the Europeans for European goods. The European maps reflected these areas. It was called the land of the Negroes, and it was also called the kingdom of Judah. They have since changed the map, but you can still look up the 1747 map of West Africa and see what you see on the screen. Israel was replaced by his brother Esau. In the infamous Willie Lynch letter, where he uses strong language as to how to make a slave, let me just read a few quotes from Willie Lynch, because he talks about the Great Awakening. He knew that this was a possibility, that it could come, and it could undo everything they have done concerning the brainwashing and conditioning of God's chosen people. Quote, and excuse the language that he uses here, continually through the breaking of uncivilized savage niggers by throwing the nigger female savage into a frozen psychological state of independence, by killing the protective male image, and by creating a submissive dependent mind of the nigger male slave. We have created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever, unless, and listen at this, unless a phenomena occurs and reshifts the position of the male and the female slaves. We show that we mean by example. Take the case of the two economic slave slave units and examining them closer. And then he gives a warning, possible interloping negatives. Earlier, we talked about the non-economic good of the horse and the nigger in their wild or natural state. We talked about the principle of breaking and trying them together for the ordinary production. Furthermore, we talked about paying particular attention to the female savage and her offspring for ordinary future planning. Then, more and recently, we stated that by reversing the positions of the male and female savages, we create an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever unless a phenomena occurs and shifts positions of the male and female savages. Our experts warn us about the possibility of this phenomena occurring, for they say that the mind has a strong drive to correct and recorrect itself over a period of time if it can touch some substantial original historical base. This is why they want to hide our history from us, and they advise us that the best way to deal with the phenomena is to shave off the brute's mental history and create a multiplicity of phenomena of illusions, so that each illusion will twirl in its own orbit, something similar to floating balls in a vacuum. So what he's saying is that there is a possibility of a phenomena happening that will undo all of the conditioning that they have put upon God's chosen people. He talks about a historical basis and God's people's mental history. They said how we combat that is to create a multiplicity of phenomena, of illusions. In other words, lies and deception. This is what we've been saddled with for well over 400 years, where our enemies have twisted our identity and hidden our history. But the phenomena is that God would wake his people up one day. And so it is. We are waking up. 2019 and the awakening have begun. The Gentiles know that once the awakening starts, they won't be able to stop it, and it will culminate in Yeshua destroying their nations. Already the destroyer is here, beginning the destruction of white Anglo power in the world today. This great shift will take place, and it is taking place right before our eyes. People are very confused as to what is happening, but those that are in the know, they know what comes next. Yeshua will take over the world, and he will hand the world over to his people. And he says that he would make the Gentiles and the synagogue of Satan bow before his people, acknowledging that we are his chosen people, that we are the ones that he loves. Listen at these Gentiles and listen closely what they are saying. Babylon the Great and his 7 heads are in the process of being crushed. That is what is happening in the world with all of this chaos and confusion.
I'm from Greece. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near. I am from Rome. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I am from Spain. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I am from France. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I am from Germany. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I am from Russia. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I'm from Great Britain. I am one of the 7 heads in Revelation 17 verse 9. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I'm from the United States. I am the 8th. I come from the 7. The Israelites are waking up. Our end is near.
I want to see all of humanity making a new kingdom. But nevertheless, there is true Hebrews. There is a true people of the Most High that is scattered throughout the nations of the earth this day. It is not whom that many people believe they are, such as the so-called Jews in the nation-state of Israel that we so see before us right now. I would interject that the true biblical Hebrews are the so-called African-American people that are scattered abroad throughout the world. Now, I will show you through a mass amount of evidence that I'll put up on the screen right here, verses below, and you can do your due diligence and research these things out to see if they be so. It is very important that you understand who the true Hebrews are, because that end-time prophecy, lots of it, surround these individuals. I am a Gentile. I know exactly who I am, but it seems
This is the history that those Gentiles living in Israel, those that are slaughtering all of their neighbors, acting just like what Yeshua said they are, the synagogue of Satan. He says that the descendants of Esau will live by the sword. That means they will live by war and killing. His sword and his hand will be against all of his neighbors. This is the history that they are trying to hide from the world, and especially God's people. They have given us an alternate truth, which is a lie.
Innocent Jews. One of the world's dirtiest secrets is that the exterminated Jews in Nazi Germany were not considered real Jews. They were considered Khazar Russians and Eastern Europeans whose ancestors converted to Judaism in 740 AD under their king, King Bulan. Their bloodline dates back to the Turkish tribes and to the powerful empire of Khazaria that once controlled all of Russia. Arthur Kessler, who wrote The 13th Tribe, claims that over 90% of today's Jews are racially non-Jewish and have no genetic relationship to the 12 tribes of Israel. Today's Jews, says Kessler, are more related to Attila the Hun than King Solomon of Israel.
They banned us from reading, from learning the truth. But knowledge of self is the greatest weapon.
If these people are really the true children of Israel, the chosen people of God, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, why are they so touchy when you talk about proof of that? When you question their identity, a black person can say, I'm anything else, and they won't bother them. But the minute you say that we are the true Israelites, we are the true Jews, jobs will be lost. Lives many times will be lost. Careers will be ruined. You may even be taken to court for anti-Semitism. You will be labeled an anti-Semite, and whatever position you have in society will be affected by that. Even universities who dare criticize the nation of Israel have lost funding and credibility. Why is that? If it's the truth, then it will stand the test of investigation. It will stand the test of truth. It will also stand the test of time. If it is not true, yes, they're going to need to hide it, because the truth has a way of uncovering itself.
When Kanye West got up and said he was an Israelite, you seen how they done him. When you get up and say you an Egyptian like all the other rappers is and walk around with unks on, they don't do that to you. When you saying that you are African American and trying to succeed in America, they don't do that to you. They only do you how they did Kanye West when you say you are Israelite. Why? Because they know that's who you really are.
Get this straight, everybody. The people running Israel are not Semites. Let's just start with that. They're Ashkenazi Jews from northeastern parts beyond Turkey back in the day.
Black Israelites, 99.9% of African Americans have Hebrew DNA. This has been hidden for centuries, but it is the truth, and it can be easily proven by taking a DNA test by someone who is unbiased. They also have the E1B1A hepatitype. This has to do with the priestly line and the line of Judah. It is written in our DNA. This is why the people over in Israel today are so sensitive to taking DNA tests because they know it will reveal that they are not Semitic at all, but they are European, just as the Bible said they would be. That they are trampling down Israel and Jerusalem at this very moment, and they will trample it down until the Messiah comes back and reveals to the world who his people really are.
Why are DNA tests illegal in Israel?
There are Ashkenazi Jews who are entirely European in their DNA. That's why you're not allowed to have a DNA test in Israel, because it will reveal that virtually none of them.
The people who call themselves but are not, as Jesus said, they did not speak Hebrew. They spoke Yiddish. They come from Eastern Europe primarily. They have no blood ties to the Holy Land. That is why they've outlawed DNA testing in Israel.
Yeah, I've looked up the DNA test. They basically have none.
I'll tell you that the real Jews fled to West Africa before being captured by Islamic slave traders and Ashkenazi Jews, then sold into slavery in the Americas. You don't know about Olaudah Equiano. You don't know about that because you don't know that he was an Igbo Jew who documented his experience of being captured and enslaved and taken to the Americas. To those who identify as black in America, I use that term only to get your attention. You are not black. You are a Hebrew Israelite. You are a descendant of Jacob. Our ancestors sinned against the Most High, and we worshipped idols, defiled his name, and abandoned his commandments. Deuteronomy 28 warned us that we would either receive blessings or curses, and we chose the disobedience and suffered the consequences. And some of you all are still doing that today. And I won't say just you all, we all have fallen away from God's word. But as Paul said, if we will turn back to the Most High, we will be engrafted into the true vine, right back where we started, if we turn to the Most High. And to you Gentiles, your time has ended. The time of the Gentiles is over, and our Redeemer draws near. Justice is coming, and the suffering and persecution of the true children of God will be avenged. That is the true tribulation. That is prophecy, and not what you've been falsely taught and indoctrinated by. Many of you are following the wrong people, thinking that the Revelation 2:9ers are actually the Jews, and they are imposters that are fulfilling the prophecies, but they are leading you straight to a false Messiah.
You made a claim that all Jews are European.
I just want to clarify so you know what I mean. The so-called Jew who is controlling the state of Israel, those are Europeans. I'm essentially stating that they are not a Semitic people who originate in the Middle East. They're European, just like your current prime minister who's changed his name from something sounding more Polish, more Eastern European. And if you track the history of a lot of people in that administration, they all changed their names to sound more Hebrew. Is that true? Is it true?
Absolutely.
It is true, exactly, because they're Europeans masquerading.
They told you the Bible was theirs, that God looked like them, that Jesus was a blue-eyed European savior. But here's the truth they buried. The faith of the Bible, the Torah and Tanakh, came from a black Semitic people, the ancient Israelites. Brown-skinned, woolly-haired, Afro-Asiatic descendants who lived in Africa and the Levant, not Europe. The modern images of biblical characters, their artistic lies created by Rome in the Renaissance, propaganda to rewrite spiritual power into white hands. The name Jesus didn't exist until the 17th century. His real name was Yahusha, meaning Yahuwah is salvation, but Rome translated, twisted, and renamed everything, including Yahuwah, the true name of the Most High. Then they took the book written for, by, and about our people, edited it, weaponized it, and used it to enslave us. They erased our Hebrew identity, stripped the laws, hid the names, created a slave Bible, removing the parts about freedom, justice, and chosen people. But here's the truth. We are not cursed. We are covenant people, waking up, just like the prophet said in Baruch 2:30, Ezekiel 37, and Isaiah 11:11. And now, the world is watching the Great Awakening. Our people returning to Yahuwah, reclaiming our names, keeping the commandments, and remembering who we are. The very people they tried to erase were the chosen people all along. And the scriptures they used to try and control us, they were ours from the beginning.
These people are false Christians. They are satanic monsters pretending to be evangelists and pastors. But guess what? They are telling Bush the Jews are God's chosen. God wants them to have the land. Drive the Palestinians off of it. Take their land, take their businesses, take their orchards. What does it matter? God wants this. And Bush says, I'm doing this for God. The Jews are God's chosen people.
Right.
They're like gods on earth. Let's put them on the pedestal. They can't do any wrong. In fact, I've seen people like John Hagee, Cornerstone Church in San Antonio. He actually says that the chief mission of Christians today is to make sure that Israel keeps their land. Now, I thought it was to save souls. I thought it was to reach people. I thought it was to go help the downtrodden, the poor, and poverty. I thought it was to do the works of Jesus. But you know what they say? Our mission is to make Israel a superpower. Our mission is to give them billions of dollars every year in support. Our mission is to make sure the Muslims don't get the bomb, even though Israel has 400 nuclear weapons as a minimum.
Right.
And I have a quote from a Hebrew professor at Hebrew University, I should say, Jewish, who says, if the Europeans don't do what we say, we'll nuke them too. We can topple the capitals of Europe with our nuclear bombs.
Let me introduce myself. I'm a former Lutheran pastor who spent over a decade serving in the church. And I didn't leave it because I lost my faith. I left it because I saw how the church intentionally manipulates people. I watched the church manipulate people's pain, twist scripture, and silence anyone who challenged the status quo. The goal was never peace or kindness. It was control. For over 10 years, I watched people get shamed, silenced, and manipulated, all in the name of love and grace. And once I saw that clearly, I walked away. I didn't lose my faith. I outgrew the abuse disguised as truth. So no, people did not ruin my faith. I let the truth ruin the lie of Christianity. It's psychology. Everything your church does, from the lighting to the music to the layout of the service, is to emotionally manipulate you. And again, if it's working for you, great, fantastic, but we have to delineate facts from feelings. And just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true.
Are you ready to confront the darkest chapter of this story? Because discrimination based on European appearance versus Middle Eastern heritage is just the beginning. What happens when the discrimination is based purely on skin color, when Jewish identity itself is questioned because of African ancestry? The treatment of Ethiopian Jews in Israel represents one of the most shameful chapters in modern Jewish history, and it exposes the uncomfortable reality of racism within communities that should know better than anyone the devastating effects of racial prejudice. These are people whose Jewish traditions predate many modern Jewish practices, whose connection to biblical Israel runs deeper than genealogy, whose faith sustained them through centuries of isolation in the mountains of Ethiopia. Yet they have faced discrimination, violence, and marginalization that would make any student of Jewish history sick to their stomach. The Beta Israel community of Ethiopia practiced Judaism for over 2,000 years in complete isolation from other Jewish communities. They observed Shabbat, kept kosher, celebrated Passover, and maintained Hebrew prayers without any contact with European or Middle Eastern Jewish communities. Their traditions, in many ways, preserved ancient Jewish practices that had been lost or modified in other communities. They were more Jewish than many people who never questioned their Jewish identity. When Israeli researchers first encountered the Beta Israel in the 1950s, they found a community that observed Judaism in forms that were remarkably consistent with ancient biblical practices. Their Passover celebrations included elements that had disappeared from other Jewish communities. Their understanding of Torah was sophisticated and deep. Their commitment to Jewish law was absolute. Yet when they began arriving in Israel, they were told their Judaism wasn't authentic enough. The rescue operations that brought Ethiopian Jews to Israel, Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991 were portrayed as heroic efforts to save persecuted Jews from poverty and oppression. The reality was more complex and far less flattering. While Israel did provide refuge for people who desperately needed it, the treatment they received upon arrival was shocking and discriminatory. Ethiopian Jewish immigrants were subjected to forced conversions despite having practiced Judaism for centuries. Rabbinical authorities declared that their traditional practices were insufficient and demanded that they undergo formal conversion ceremonies. Imagine the psychological impact of being told that your ancestors weren't really Jewish, that your grandparents' prayers weren't valid, that your community's understanding of Judaism was fundamentally flawed. The discrimination extended far beyond religious authorities into every aspect of Israeli society. Ethiopian Jewish children were placed in inferior schools and tracked into vocational programs regardless of their academic abilities. Ethiopian Jewish adults found themselves excluded from professional opportunities and government positions. Ethiopian Jewish families were housed in the poorest neighborhoods and given minimal social services. The blood donation scandal of the 1990s revealed the depth of institutionalized racism against Ethiopian Jews. Blood donated by Ethiopian immigrants was routinely discarded without testing based on racist assumptions about African health and sexuality. When this practice was exposed, it sparked protests and international condemnation, but it also revealed attitudes that went far deeper than individual prejudice. Employment discrimination against Ethiopian Jews has been documented extensively by Israeli civil rights organizations. Studies show that resumes with Ethiopian Jewish names receive far fewer interview requests than identical resumes with Ashkenazi Jewish names. Ethiopian Jewish graduates from Israeli universities face unemployment rates that are double or triple those of other Jewish communities. Professional advancement is extremely limited, with very few Ethiopian Jews reaching senior positions in government, business, or academia. Educational discrimination has created generational disadvantages that persist today. Ethiopian Jewish children are disproportionately placed in special education programs, expelled from schools, and pushed toward vocational training rather than academic advancement. Teachers often have lower expectations for Ethiopian Jewish students, and guidance counselors steer them away from university preparation. The result is a community that remains economically and socially marginalized despite having been in Israel for decades. Housing discrimination has created geographic segregation that reinforces social marginalization. Ethiopian Jewish families are concentrated in the poorest neighborhoods and development towns, often far from employment opportunities and quality schools. When Ethiopian Jewish families try to move to more affluent neighborhoods, they often face resistance from landlords, neighbors, and local authorities. The police brutality and violence directed against Ethiopian Jews has shocked even Israeli civil rights advocates. Young Ethiopian Jewish men report being stopped, searched, and harassed by police at rates far higher than other Israeli citizens. The tragic cases of Damas Picada in 2015 and Solomon Tekke in 2019 sparked massive protests and international attention, but they also revealed patterns of violence and discrimination that had been ongoing for years. Damas Picada was an Israeli Defense Forces soldier who was brutally beaten by police while in uniform simply because of his skin color. The video of his beating went viral and sparked protests across Israel. But Picada's case wasn't isolated. It was representative of experiences that Ethiopian Jewish men face regularly in their interactions with Israeli authorities. Solomon Tekke was an 18-year-old Ethiopian Jewish Israeli who was shot and killed by an off-duty police officer in 2019. His death sparked the largest Ethiopian Jewish protests in Israeli history, with tens of thousands taking to the streets to demand justice and equal treatment. The protests revealed decades of accumulated anger and frustration with systematic discrimination and violence. The cultural marginalization of Ethiopian Jews extends beyond individual discrimination into institutional neglect and cultural erasure. Ethiopian Jewish traditions, languages, and customs receive minimal recognition or support from Israeli cultural institutions. Children grow up learning European Jewish history while remaining ignorant of their own community's rich heritage. Traditional Ethiopian Jewish religious leaders are marginalized within Israeli religious institutions. Military service, which is supposed to be a path to integration and advancement in Israeli society, has often been a source of additional discrimination for Ethiopian Jews. Ethiopian Jewish soldiers report facing racism from both officers and fellow soldiers. They are often assigned to menial positions regardless of their qualifications and rarely advance to leadership roles. The military, which prides itself on being a melting pot of Israeli society, has struggled to address systematic racism against Ethiopian Jews. The psychological impact of this discrimination on Ethiopian Jewish families has been devastating. Suicide rates among Ethiopian Jewish youth are significantly higher than other Israeli communities. Depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems are widespread. Many Ethiopian Jewish immigrants report feeling that they made a terrible mistake in coming to Israel, that they traded poverty in Ethiopia for racism and marginalization in the Jewish state. The response from Israeli society has been mixed and inadequate. While some Israeli leaders have acknowledged the problem of discrimination against Ethiopian Jews and promised reforms, structural changes have been minimal and slow. Civil rights organizations have documented ongoing discrimination, but their reports are often ignored or dismissed by government authorities. The religious establishment's treatment of Ethiopian Jews reveals the ugliest aspects of Jewish institutional racism. Communities that maintained Jewish traditions for centuries in isolation were told their practices weren't valid. Rabbis who had led their communities through persecution and exile were told they weren't qualified to serve in Israeli synagogues. Ancient traditions that connected directly to biblical Judaism were declared insufficient by authorities whose own traditions had been shaped by centuries of exile and adaptation. The irony is almost too painful to acknowledge. Ethiopian Jews whose ancestors never left Africa, whose traditions never incorporated European influences, whose Jewish identity was never questioned by their neighbors, found themselves treated as second-class citizens in a state that was supposedly established to provide refuge for all Jewish people. The very people whose Judaism was most purely biblical were told their Judaism wasn't good enough. This treatment of Ethiopian Jews exposes the reality of racism within Israeli society and the extent to which European Jewish standards became normative for defining Jewish authenticity. It reveals how communities that experienced horrific persecution based on race and religion can unconsciously perpetuate similar discrimination against others. It demonstrates the gap between Israel's stated values of being a refuge for all Jewish people and the reality of how different Jewish communities are actually treated. The Ethiopian Jewish experience in Israel serves as a mirror that reflects uncomfortable truths about identity, race, and belonging. It forces us to confront questions about who gets to define Jewish authenticity, who benefits from Jewish solidarity, and what happens when the victims of racism become perpetrators of discrimination against others. But wait, the story gets even more complex when we consider communities that claim Jewish identity but are rejected entirely by Israeli authorities. Communities whose claims to biblical heritage might be stronger than those who currently hold power.
Old time the shofar. Blow the shofar. Awaken, O Yasra Alafah. Return to the ancient path. Lift up your voice and don't hold back. Bishop Yasra Yahuwah. Return Yasra to Yahuwah. For the day draws near. Let the remnant rise with no fear. Yeah. Hearts of stone now turn to flesh. By the Ruach we are refreshed. Torah written on our hearts. The covenant sealed, the count starts.
I'm out of time. That brings us to the close of this session. As you know, they are trying to put an end to God's people waking up. They're attacking any platform that God's people are using in order to communicate the truth. There is a concerted effort to suppress content that is aimed at waking God's chosen people up. Take a snapshot of this last page and keep it handy, because if you can't find this content on one channel, you can find it on any of these. You can also email me, or you can give me a telephone call. This is all the information. You can download any of these apps and then go to the website and you will be able to see our content. Until next week, may God richly bless each and every one of you. Shalom.